In the late 1970s, the quiet mill town of Fall River, Massachusetts, found itself at the center of a dark and bewildering series of crimes. The Fall River cult killings would come to symbolize a moment when fear, rumor, and genuine horror collided in the midst of a national anxiety about the occult. It began with the discovery of a young woman's body in a wooded area near the edge of town, an area locals knew for its isolation and the faint hum of traffic from distant highways. Police officers arriving on scene noted the cold bite of early autumn air, the wet leaves clinging to their boots, and the uneasy silence that followed their flashlights through the trees. The victim had been brutally murdered, and signs around her suggested something ritualistic, though investigators were cautious to make any pronouncements. Fall River was a community used to the rhythm of factory whistles and church bells, not the glare of police lights cutting through fog. Within days, word spread that this was not an ordinary killing. Whispers of cults, of strange gatherings in abandoned buildings, began to move through diners, schools, and church groups. The town's identity, once rooted in hard work and quiet resilience, was suddenly overshadowed by suspicion and dread. Newspapers from Boston and Providence sent reporters to capture the story, and their headlines hinted at satanic influence long before evidence confirmed anything. Parents began locking doors earlier, and teachers noticed students speaking in hushed tones about the woods. For many in Fall River, the sense of safety that had defined small-town life was gone overnight, replaced by a chilling realization that something unexplainable might be living among them. When police and medical examiners began their work, the scene was treated with the care demanded by a potentially ritualistic homicide. Officers marked footprints in the mud with small wooden stakes, careful not to disturb the fragile impressions left by boots and sneakers. The crime scene photographer moved slowly, using flashbulbs that briefly illuminated the trees before darkness swallowed them again. The body was transported to the county medical examiner's office under heavy rain, the sound of the ambulance siren echoing off the narrow streets. Residents who had gathered behind the police tape watched in silence, the glow of street lamps reflecting off wet pavement. Inside the station, detectives reviewed the first reports, noting inconsistencies in witness statements about strange vehicles seen near the woods. The local dispatcher fielded calls from frightened citizens, claiming to have heard chanting or seen fires on the outskirts of town. Most of these calls led nowhere, but they added to the growing sense of unease. The police chief arranged for additional patrols, though manpower was limited, and over time budgets were stretched thin. Officers carried flashlights and revolvers, scanning empty lots and abandoned mills where teenagers often gathered. The medical examiner's preliminary findings confirmed that the victim had been killed elsewhere and left in the woods, deepening the mystery. The press conference that followed was brief and tense, with reporters pressing for details the department refused to release. The town, once defined by the hum of textile machinery, now pulsed with rumor and fear. Even those who dismissed talk of cults could not ignore the unease that settled over their neighborhoods. As weeks turned into months, the investigation expanded across city lines. Detectives interviewed transient workers, nightclub employees, and anyone rumored to be involved in occult practices. In the absence of digital databases, all records were handwritten and stored in heavy binders that filled the detective bureau's shelves. Officers compared notes late into the night, tracing connections between missing persons reports and local runaways. Evidence was processed using the tools available at the time: fingerprint powder, Polaroid documentation, and chemical tests performed in modest regional labs. Each step required patience and paperwork, often slowed by backlogs. Meanwhile, the community responded with vigils and prayer services, filling church pews under candlelight. Clergy spoke about evil as a force that could take root anywhere, and their words resonated in a town desperate for reassurance. Parents began escorting children to school, and hardware stores sold out of locks and motion lights. Local radio hosts debated whether the killings were the work of a cult or simply individuals using fear as a weapon. The investigation's scope widened when another body was discovered months later, bearing similar injuries. This second crime confirmed that the first had not been an isolated act. Detectives coordinated with state police and the district attorney's office, sharing evidence through courier rather than computer. Each new report added layers to a case that seemed to grow darker by the day. The people of Fall River waited for answers, their nerves frayed by every new headline. By early 1980, the term cult killings had become unavoidable in the press, shaping public perception long before trials began. Investigators pursued leads, suggesting that a small group of individuals had formed around shared drug use, exploitation, and a distorted fascination with satanic imagery. The media's coverage reflected the broader national mood, the early edge of what would later be known as the Satanic Panic. Television news segments showed pentagrams and candlelit basements, often blurring the line between verified evidence and cultural fear. The accused, when arrested, appeared in courtrooms crowded with reporters, their faces half hidden behind police escorts. Prosecutors built their case through testimony from surviving witnesses who described rituals and coercion. Defense attorneys countered that hysteria had overtaken reason, arguing that the evidence was circumstantial and colored by public panic. The proceedings were tense, with jurors instructed to ignore the noise outside the courthouse. In Fall River, shop owners taped newspaper clippings to their windows, and conversations about the case filled coffee counters and barbershops. The once abstract idea of evil had become tangible, embodied in neighbors now accused of unspeakable acts. As verdicts were read, relief mixed uneasily with disbelief. Some residents felt justice had been served. Others were left wondering how their town could have harbored such darkness. The story spread beyond Massachusetts, feeding into a national narrative that blurred fact and folklore. In the years that followed, the Fall River murders remained a cautionary chapter in both criminal and cultural history. The convictions brought a measure of closure, yet questions lingered about how much of the horror had been shaped by genuine crime, and how much by collective fear. For investigators who worked the case, the memories stayed vivid. The damp woods, the long nights of interviews, the faces of families waiting for news. The community slowly rebuilt its sense of safety, though the shadow of those years never disappeared entirely. Historians now view the case as an early flashpoint in the era of moral panic that swept through the United States during the 1980s. It revealed how violence, rumor, and media attention could intertwine, transforming isolated crimes into symbols of a nation's anxiety. In Fall River, memorials to the victims remain simple. A few flowers left at the edge of the woods, a name etched quietly into local memory. The mills still stand, their windows reflecting the same gray light that once fell on police search teams decades earlier. For the people who lived through it, the story is not a legend, but a reminder of how fear can spread faster than truth, and how communities must find their way back from both. The case endures not only as a record of violence, but as a study in the fragile balance between justice, belief, and the stories we tell to make sense of the dark.